Hey guys, we are live. Very happy to see you today. First of all, please click the like button, okay, and share this stream. Let your friends know that we are live and that we are going to be live for the next few minutes. No, a lot of minutes, maybe more than an hour. We'll see. It's going to depend on how it is going to go with, by answering your questions and everything. Now, first, what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce you to my guest this week. His name is David Vignola. He's a very good friend of mine, and he runs the YouTube channel Home Recording Made Easy. So I'm going to just bring David in to join us. David, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Cool. Very happy to see you, and it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a fun one.
Yeah, it's a good topic.
Today, because we're going to share with you 3 tips on mixing with analog type plugins. So this is going to be an interesting one. So what we're going to do, guys, is first we're going to jump straight into the topic, and we are going to share all those 3 tips with you. Then we're going to take the time to answer all of your questions. So feel free to just write down questions right away if you want to, and probably a lot of them are going to already, because I already see some questions that people added, and probably some of them are going to be answered when we're going to cover the tip. So let's start with the first tip, David. So I'm going to let you start, my friend.
Okay, so yeah, tip number 1 for when you're using these kinds of plugins and mixing is to try to mimic as close as you can the actual signal flow of an analog studio. So if you think about a big, you paid your thousands of dollars an hour to go to a big time studio, and you walk in and there's this huge mixing console, regardless of what brand it is, and you're going to record there. Well, how would that signal flow go? So we typically go, musicians are out in the live room, they're plugged into microphones, they're playing live, they're recording. That's going to typically can go to a tape machine, a 16-track, a multi-track tape machine. So my first plugin would be the multi-track tape machine, and regardless of what manufacturer you choose to use, but a tape machine. Then from there, it's going to go to some kind of you're going to have a mixing desk, right? Some kind of a console preamp. So I'm going to use a console emulation plugin as my second plugin. So mine is, I typically like the Slate VCC, but you can use whoever you like. And then from the console, where it's going to do most of the heavy lifting, you're going to go then to a channel strip. So, again, if you want to use an SSL or an Eve or an API or whatever suits you. So that's going to be the third plugin in the chain. Oh yeah, you got a great demonstration of this. So yeah, that's exactly kind of how an analog signal flow would go. And then from the channel strip, it's going to go to 1 to 2 places. It's eventually going to go out the mix bus of the channel strip, right? Or excuse me, of the console to a 2-track tape machine. Okay, which would be on your master bus in your DAW, right? Now, sometimes, which I guess we'll talk about a little bit in a bit, between the channel strip plugin and the master bus, you may insert, if you will, a different piece of hardware somewhere along the way. Maybe you'll insert a Pultec EQ on one of the channels, or an 1176. So depending on what you want to do there, which we could talk about after, that would be the next plugin. So that's my first tip. Is my whole thing is, when I look at my DAW, I think of it as an analog studio, and I try to mimic that workflow, and that's going to give you a more authentic, if you will, vibe to your mix.
So you start with a tape,
just like you have on the screen.
Like this one. I love to use the Studer from UAD.
Yeah, it's awesome. I have it. It's great. And if you don't have UAD, if you don't have a universal audio rig, you can always use something like the Slate Digital Virtual Tape Machine.
Exactly. Yeah.
And waves.
Also, if you're a Cubase user, Magneto does the job.
Right.
Also, which is also a tape machine emulation.
Yep.
Then you go straight to a console emulation plugin.
Yep.
I love to use the NLS from Waves. There's also a very good one from Sonimus called the Satson, and also the Brixton also, which is a very cool one. One will mimic a bit more of a SSL type console, and the Brixton is mainly going to do a Neve type of emulation. Those are actually pretty cheap, so they're not very expensive. And as far as channel strip, for me, I really like this one, the DBX Console N from Plugin Alliance.
Yeah, that's a great one. I have that as well. Yep.
Yeah, so there you go. So this is basically what we have here. And you were talking about the mix bus.
Right, and then it goes out to the mix bus, and typically on the mix bus, I will put the mix, right, what you have there, either the NLS or the Slate VCC, either one of those plugins on the mix bus, on your tube bus. And then after that, I would typically put some kind of a bus compressor. And again, that for me, it can range anywhere from one of the Slate, either the Focusrite FG Red or the or the I really like his the FG Mu, the Mangley Mu. But you can use any kind of bus compressor. And then from there, I will sometimes, depending on the mix, I'll put some kind of an EQ of some kind that I might or may not use, right? And then from there, back right what you have on the scrreen to a tape machine.
Yep.
And that's
actually a very good one for the stereo bus. I love the Ampex. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one because that one gives you a really nice, warm, not too hyped, low end bump that really, you just need that little extra bottom end. That tape machine plugin will do it for you.
Exactly.
And that's my signal flow for almost 90% of my mixes. That's how I set it up. And the only thing that will change is if one mix I want to do an SSL, I'll use an SSL channel strip, or a Neve, I'll use a Neve. And then if I do that, I make sure that the console emulation plugin matches the channel strip. So if I'm using the Waves NLS and I'm using the the SSL emulation, I'll make sure I use an SSL channel strip or Neve.
Cool. Nice. So let's jump on the second tip. I'm going to talk about gain staging, and this is going to go for most analog type plugins. Now, the thing with analog type plugins compared to digital plugins like a regular EQ out of your DAW or the stock compressor is the amount of signal that you can get in before you start picking the plugin. When we talk about the digital world, we talking about dBFS. So when you go past 0 dBFS, you're clipping, you're destroying the signal. So this is a no-go. In the analog world, we are more talking about VU meters that we see on a bunch of mixing consoles or analog gear. We have that VU meter, so 0 VU is not the same as 0 dBFS. It's not the same at all.
Right.
And this is something very important because when companies do some plugin emulation and are trying to emulate analog plugins, if they're well done, they will also emulate the 0 dB effect on the analog gear also, so meaning that if you go past the peaking point of 0 VU, it's going to start adding a bit more color and saturation, which is a good thing in the analog world. In digital, when you go past 0 dBFS, it's no good. You're destroying the signal. So the trick is you need to bring the digital peak, which is 0 dBFS, or let's turn that around. Okay, the 0 VU. Okay, what is the translation in dBFS? And that is going to give you what is going to be your gain staging level for not to peak too much the analog plugin, or to peak it the right way. So basically, if you take any VU meter plugins and you pass just a straight signal into it, you can actually balance that out, and it's going to turn out to be at around minus 18 dBFS. That will reach that 0 VU sweet spot. So that's why almost all the time, I'm going to gain stage my signal to at an average of minus 18 dB to start with. It could go a bit above, it doesn't matter, or a bit lower, it doesn't matter. But I know that when I'm going to pass my signal through those analog plugins, whether it's a compressor or analog console emulation, if my signal is at around minus 18 dB or so, it's going to be at around 0 VU.
That's right.
In analog, So I can bring that higher if I want to and just, saturate the plugin a bit. It's going to work well. It's going to sound good. So that is the trick to work with analog plugin. If they're well emulated, they're going to have that 0 VU sweet spot going on. So gain staging your signal so you can have control whether or not you want to peak that signal to go past the sweet spot of 0 VU. So that's my...
Right. Yeah. Right. And a lot of people don't realize that because we're in the digital world, as you said, not hitting things too heavy, being conservative is what you want to do in digital. But when you use these plugins, the point is to push these plugins a little. That's where they sound their best.
Exactly.
Right. So you're right. So if you're trying to hit, you want to read, usually a lot of the manufacturers in their manuals, if you read them, they're, the good ones, they'll tell you what that spec is. And you said it's about my negative 18 dB is 0 on the meter is for most of them. So if you're hitting 0 on your meter, the way you're driving the input signal into the plugin, that's usually, like you said, really close to the sweet spot. That's where it's going to sound its most optimum typically.
There you go. So that's what I always do. And, gain staging, that's another topic,
Yeah, that's a whole nother.
But this is one of the advantage and one of the reasons why I gain stage my my recordings.
Right.
My mixing, yeah.
Yep.
This is one of the reasons. There's several other reasons, but
right.
This is part of one.
Right.
So let's go with the third and last tip on working with analog plugins.
So for me, one of the things that I don't see a lot of people talking about, but something really keep in mind, there's a lot of advantages to being in the digital realm, right? In the digital, we have, unlimited editing capabilities, unlimited track counts, and now we also have the ability to have unlimited amount of plugins. So what does that mean? So for example, if you have your UAD, like you showed there, and you have your 1176 plugin, your 1176 compressor, theoretically, there's nothing stopping you from putting that 1176 compressor on. If you have 50 tracks in your session, you could put an 1176 on 50 tracks if you wanted to. There's nothing stopping you from that. But when you're working in the analog world, and again, if you're trying to replicate or emulate an analog style mix, when you were working in the analog world, when you walked into a studio, as I said earlier, yes, you have the big console and you have a bunch of outboard gear. But depending on the studio you went into, you didn't have 30 1176s in the room to use. You maybe had a pair, right? Or maybe you had one LA2A, or maybe you had a couple of Pultecs if you were lucky. Or if you were really lucky, you got to see a Fairchild, which I've never seen up front in a studio in any of the studios I've ever worked in. I've heard about them, but I never saw one. And so I would have in the studios I would used to work in back then, there'd be a couple 1176s, there'd be an LA2A, there would be a couple of LA3s, maybe a DBX 160, and if I've seen some Pultecs and other stuff, but those are the main players, right?
David, can you just bring your level down just a bit? I read a couple of comments.
Sure, absolutely.
You're a bit loud, so let me know, guys, if this is better. All right, continue.
Let's turn that. Let me just do it from here. Okay, how's that? Any better? Hopefully.
Let's go with that, and we'll see.
We'll see. Okay, so if you only have a limited amount of gear in the studio, then when I'm mixing, I try to think of it that way. So when I'm doing a mix, I'll limit myself and I'll say, okay, I'm going to use my channel strips as we talked about earlier, but I'm only going to allow myself to use two 1176s in this mix. I don't know where I'm going to put them yet, but two 1176s. I'm going to have one LA2A, maybe an LA3. I'll give myself a Fairchild because, hey, why not? A Pultec, and maybe one or two other choices of pieces of gear that's common that you would typically see. And when you go through the mix, if I only have two 1176s, I have to decide sometime in the mix, where is those 1176s going to go? What am I going to use them on? Because I can't use them on everything. I mean, I can, but I don't want to, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
what I try to do is I try to think of those pieces of outboard gear as kind of the extra spice in the soup, right? Because the channel strip is doing most of the heavy lifting. It's doing most of the EQ. It's going to do most of the compression on some level. You're going to get the benefit of the preamp and the transformers and the thing that channel strip gives you. But now I want to use the outboard gear as a way to set individual elements of the mix apart from everything else. Because if everything's running through an SSL channel strip, for example, everything's got the SSL spice or flavor on it.
Yeah, of course.
Right? But now it's a pop song, so it's got a vocal track in it. So the vocal is the most important instrument in the song. So I know that, okay, not only do I want to hear the vocal, obviously, but I want it to sound a little more unique than everything else. So I'm still going to run it through the channel strip, but maybe then I'm going to reserve the 1176, for example, as a compressor for the vocal. Because as we know, or if you know, once you get into really understanding compression, the compressors that we choose when we're talking about analog plugins isn't so much for compression, because you can use a stock compressor in Cubase to compress. All compressors compress. it really becomes the tone of the compressor is what sets
Exactly,
the
yeah.
difference, right? Why would we choose an 1176, the black face or over the blue stripe? Because the blue stripe has a more open top end, the black face is warmer. So if I have a female vocal that has a real kind of high airy thing, and it may even be a little bit too much on the top, I may not use an EQ to roll off her top end. I might use an 1176 black face because I know it's going to warm her vocal up. Or conversely, with a male vocal real chesty, I may use a blue stripe on him because it's going to bring out more air as opposed to using an EQ. Yeah. And then that is going to give that particular track a little more flavor and something that doesn't sound like everything else that's in the mix. So I will typically always reserve one compressor and usually one of the pull techs for a lead vocal, typically, because I know I can spice the vocal up with those two things, and that's going to sound unique. Maybe I'll save an LA2A for a bass. Maybe.
And this is a bit like, it's mixing with limitations.
Yes, it's exactly
Because
what it is.
If we put ourselves into an analog environment, the chances are that you're not gonna end up with 10 1176s, and
no,
12 LE2As. You're gonna have like a
Right.
couple available. You're gonna have to pick and choose and to prioritize a certain channel to work with them. So I kind of like that approach of mixing with limitations. This is something that actually, in my opinion, can increase the quality of your mixing, especially the knowledge that you already have. When you're mixing with limitations, whether you're mixing with only analog type plugins and you want to emulate an analog environment like you're sharing right now, or you're mixing with stock plugins, and that's another topic. But it's the same type of it's the same kind of thing, where you limit yourself to X amount of plugins or X amount of type of plugins, and you move forward with the knowledge that you have. And we're talking about EQing, compression, saturation, reverb and stuff, without, focusing too much on the amount of 1176 you have into your session.
That's right.
About that quality of compression you get with that unit. So you're going to pick and choose where you're gonna insert it and stuff. It's kind of cool. It's a very good exercise to do at some point. Doesn't mean that you need to do it this way. We're not saying that at all.
No,
but yeah. So
it'll also teach you too when you work, if you go through that exercise, you'll learn a lot about what your plugins can and can't do. And there's a reason. I don't know if you get this, Chris, but I get this a lot with my audience, is that, wow, you got a lot of plugins. Do you really need to have 30 different compressors? Well, no, you don't need to have it, but there's a reason why there's 30 might be an exaggeration, 10 different types of compressors, because I look at those plugins like a painter looks at paint on his painting palette. He has blue, but then he also has 4 other shades of blue that he can use in his painting. And I look and I think of, especially compressors, EQs as well, but especially compressor plugins, analog style compressors. I think of them as colors.
Yeah,
I don't think of them as compressors. I don't think, I have to compress this bass, it's too dynamic. I mean, I know we know that, and that's why we use a compressor. But I am always thinking about the tone of what that does from an EQ perspective, and how it makes it jump out if that's what I want, or be more subtle if that's what I want, or to make that track sound special in the mix than I do solely on, well, it's going to compress my bass. That's true. And like we said earlier, because we're running everything through the channel strip plugin already, there's already compression on it. Because I'm already using a little bit of compressor on the channel strip. I'll always do that as well. And then I'll follow it up with another compressor.
Exactly.
To give it that whatever we're going for. And so whenever I compress on a channel strip with the channel strip plugin, for the most part, there's exceptions to this. I do very light compression, and then I kind of call it in my own head controlled compression. It's very light. I'm running through it. I'm compressing just a couple of dB just to get the color of the channel strip, the sound, right, the tone. And then I'm following it up with, okay, that vocal has to sound special. It's an 1176 with a Pultec EQ, and now that vocal's going to sound different than everything else that ran through the mix through that channel strip. And that's just kind of how I do it.
That's awesome, Dave. Okay, I think you need to turn your gain down a bit again.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, no
just
problem.
quite a bit. It's sorry about that, guys, because the system I'm using for the streams, I don't have like any metering going on, so it's kind of a
Okay,
we're
I turned it down.
trusting your judgment.
Yeah, I turned it down considerably this time, so hopefully that'll work for him.
All
Let
right.
me know. Sorry, guys, if I'm too loud. I can even back up from the microphone if that helps.
Cool stuff. So now, guys, don't forget to like this video and share the feed so you can tell your friends that we are live. So don't forget to like. And also, if you're new here on the channel, feel free to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so you stay informed every time I upload a new video, which is not almost, but every single week and sometimes twice a week. So let's jump to some Q&As. I'm going to go right on top to check what we have. I have, okay, I'm not going to pronounce your name. Sorry, I'm going to mess it up if I do. But how to use tape emulation plugins properly? That's a good question.
That is a good question. So again, I think as Chris said, a lot of it has to do with the gain staging and the way you hit the plugin. And think of tape emulation because it's a form of compression, right? So tape emulation is going to do two things for you. Typically, it's going to bump the bottom end a little bit and it's going to shave off some of the top end and round it off. It's going to, so but you have to hit that tape machine in a way, as Chris was saying, so you're hitting around that on the meter, around that 0 dB mark, which is about 2/3 of the way up. I mean, you're hitting it pretty good in order to achieve that kind of sound. And so you can push it extra hard. Some people hit a tape machine very hard to get like a distortion kind of an effect because they're going for that, right? Sometimes maybe on a bass guitar, they may want to hit the tape harder to give it a little bit of crispiness on the bass. That if you're going for that, that will do that. But typically, more times than not, I'm not using tape for that kind of an effect. I'm using it more for a compressor more than anything else, and just to kind of give some of that warmth to it. So I think also too to remember that if you're going to use this in the way we're kind of talking about, you want to put a tape machine on every one of your tracks. Every individual single track has a tape machine on it. Everything runs through the tape machine, like which Chris demonstrated.
Yeah, it's all on top, so.
Yeah. So then the only issue that people could have with this, sometimes people will say, well, depending on the plugin and depending on my computer specs, I can't put 50 plugins, tape machines on my session. My whole computer will come to a screeching halt. And that's common. Now, a lot of the tape machines today and a lot of the plugin manufacturers today are very CPU aware, and they try to make their plugins the least amount of CPU as possible. But depending on your computer specs, you may or may not be able to put a tape machine on every single track. So what you can do, as opposed to doing that, is you can put them on your buses. So if you have 8 or 10 drum tracks and you bus it to a drum bus, or I think a Cubase are called a group, right? A group track. Yeah. You can just put the tape machine and the console emulation and stuff we're talking about on the bus or on the group, and don't put it on the individual tracks. You won't get the exact same effect, but it'll get you close enough. It'll get you close enough. It's better than not doing it at all. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's really the proper way to do it, is to just make sure you're hitting it hard enough to get the effect of it.
Yeah.
But put it on as many tracks as your computer will allow, and use that as the first plugin in your chain, in your inserts.
And as you can see on the screen, like the studio, it's the same for most of tape emulation plugins. You have an input level and you also have an output level. And when your signal is at around minus 18 dBFS, that meter is going to hit like the 0 dB VU at around that point, So you want to just drive that tape emulation plugin a bit louder, just bring in a bit more input, and gain stage that back with the output, so you can have the same balance with the following plugins.
Yeah, great point, Chris. Yeah, you want to turn, if you're going to hit the tape machine harder, you're going to raise the volume, you got to turn down the output of the plugin.
Yeah.
So when you bypass it, the before and after volume is the same. It should be the same, or you're going to think because it's louder, it's actually better, but it's really not. It's, you want that level matching to be the same.
Exactly. So, when you first start to work with a tape emulation plugin, I would keep it safe and simple. Like just, start by using the input and output knobs, play with that. and then you can jump to different types of tapes like we have here, and that will depend on each plugins. Each plugins are going to be different. And then, once you're used to that and that sound and what that does to your signal, you can then go and play with those types of EQs that you have on tape machines. So if we look here just briefly to Magneto, which is part of Cubase. Now, this one works a bit differently. We have the amount of saturation. We have the dual or single mode right here. This is all types of parameters you can play with. And then you can actually focus on a band of frequencies to add that saturation on. So this is actually pretty cool also. So it's going to depend on the plugin you work with as far as tape emulation.
And you can always use a if you're not sure, you can always start with one of their presets. Will usually get you in the ballpark on a tape machine, and then you could tweak it from there. If you just start with the input and the output, and maybe the inches per, the IPS, the IPS, the inches per second, 30, 15, I think UAD has 7. That'll drastically change the sound.
Big time.
If you just play with that and just don't worry so much about what the settings are. Just use your ears and just see if and just see what you like. But also too, one last point to make about all these plugins. I don't know if we said this earlier, Chris, which is, on a single track, when you're just kind of turning on and off and listening on and off, you're going to hear a slight difference, but it may not be too audible depending on the track. Where these plugins really shine and where you really hear the difference is in the cumulative effect across many tracks. So that's one of the benefits. If you have 30 tracks in your session, if you could put 30 tape machines, 30 console emulators, 30 channel strips, and you do your mix, and then you go back and you turn all your plugins on and all your plugins off, you will hear a wild difference, major difference in sounds, as opposed to just as one single track. It will do something, but it may not be as audible as you were hoping, it was going to be.
And something cool with Cubase, if you're a Cubase user, which I know that a lot of people here are, you can use the channel strip. Channel strip is pretty cool also.
Oh, right. Yes, right. Yeah.
In Cubase. So you can use the Magneto straight from the channel strip if you want to, which is this one right here. So that works pretty well. The simpler is to use the channel settings window to access the channel strip. So and you can move all those effects around. So if you want to bring your tape emulation plugin at first, there you go, it's there. So you can easily add one tape emulation plugin on every channel using the channel strip if you want to. And that can go before your inserts or pre-inserts. And that will depend on which side you're going to bring the strip. And that small icon here will move the channel strip pre or post insert. Just a quick tip to know.
And that's a stock plugin, right? With Cubase?
This is part of Cubase. Yeah,
well, there you go.
Not part of the insert. It's a specific channel strip. All of those plugins, though, that are part of that channel strip are available as single plugins, as inserts if you want to. But if you just want to use it as a channel strip type of thing, you can. And it's pretty cool because you actually can change the order of the EQ or the compressor or whatever. So it's well done.
So then you don't have a CPU issue because it's all built inside of Cubase.
That's the advantage if you're afraid of maxing out your CPU. If you don't have like a strong enough computer to insert like 30 plugins, you can use the channel strip, and that is going to ease up the CPU use for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a good point, Dave. All right, so let's continue. I hope that answers your question. Okay, Chris is asking, may I ask you for your favorite console emulation plugins? Console emulation plugins. Let me go back to my stream. I'm going to start with this one. Most of the time, I'm going to work with the same tools. We saw it before. This is the one I like to use. Usually the NLS is a very cool one. You have like 3 different types of consoles emulation that you have. There's the that is the insert, the channel version, and there's also the bus version. not this one, but this one. There you go. So that is the bus version. To add to your instrument buses or your master bus. It's pretty cool. You know, I kind of like that you can add a bit of drive into the signal. Something to be careful not to overdo, though. And I made that mistake. But it's, it's very cool. And sometimes it doesn't mean I'm going to use that every time on every channels. If I use that console N, I'm usually going to put that right after my tape emulation plugin. And in this case, probably not going to use the NLS. You know, I'm just going to use that channel strip because this is actually an emulation of an actual Neve channel strip. And the cool thing about this one is that they emulated all the channels of that console.
That's right. That's
and
plugin
it's
pretty
cool.
Yeah.
So
it's a cool plugin.
So you have like, you know, a compressor, a gate, an EQ, of course, you know, filters and stuff. So those are my two favorites. And of course, like I said, if you're on a budget, they're very good. You know, the Sonimus, Satson, and Britston, very, very cool plugins. I think they go at around $39 US or so.
Oh yeah, that's great.
And you have the channel version and also the bus version. This one is, I think it emulates an SSL, and the other one, the Britston, is going to be more of a Neve emulation. And they sound very good. So,
yeah, that's great.
What about you, Dave?
I like the VCC by Slate Digital. I've just been using it ever since it came out, and it's just my go-to. I do have the NLS, and I like that too. The one thing I like about the NLS over the Slate is that they have the I think it's the mic, the TG12345 emulation. I forget which one that is, the mic or the spike. You know, I forget which name they call it in the Neve NLS and the Waves NLS. But they have the Neve, the SSL, and then the EMI, or it's the TG12345. It's the Abbey Road emulation. Slate doesn't have that. So whenever I like it for that. But I typically like the Slate. And you know, they have the Neve, the API. They have two SSLs that they've emulated, and a Trident console, which is an interesting sound. It's a little bit different. So that's what I typically use. And then I will always follow that up with a channel strip, even though you made a very good point. You said if I'm using the channel strip, I don't really need to use the Waves NLS, which you're right, because it's really kind of doubling up the same thing. But I do it anyway. I guess just add a little extra color. It's a little bit, it's kind of cheating. It's not exactly, but people have asked me that before.
At some point, who cares, you know?
People have asked me, well, if you're using it, do you really need to use the VCC? No, you really don't need to. The only reason why I do is it adds that extra layer of just color to the tone that I just particularly like.
There you go.
You know, so that's my favorite one.
Cool. Farema is asking if you can have only one analog gear. What would that be?
Oh, the real analog gear?
The real analog gear.
If I only can have one, I would have a mix bus compressor, something on the 2-bus. Which one would it be? If money wasn't an object, I probably would have a Neve 33609, which I really like.
Yeah. Cool.
Or an SSL, but I would have something on the 2-bus. If I only could have one, it would be a mix bus compressor.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. I don't have a lot of analog gear, but I do have my my Tegler Creme, which is a 2-bus compressor, and I always mix with it. You know, it's always on my 2-bus, always. Love the sound. I love and they have like a kind of a Paultec type EQ on it, not like 100% like the Paultec, but it's similar to what you get, you know, with the bottom and top end. So this is basically what I would have for mixing.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Then let me check what else we have here. Okay, hello, David. Okay, I'm from Portugal, and I'm a big fan. Here's my question: what do you put on your mix bus? I guess
on the mix bus. Oh, thanks, man. Thanks. I'm glad you're a fan. On my mix bus, so it'll typically it will always be the very first plugin will be the VCC, the virtual console, and then into a mix bus compressor of some kind. And I generally will rotate between one of three. And again, it's usually the Slate stuff. It's either the FG Red, the Focusrite, which I really like for the drive feature, or it's the FG Gray, which is the SSL emulation, which I really like too. And then he also has the FG Mu, which is the Manly Mu emulation. So one of those three. And then from there, I will put an EQ. Not always need it, but I will put an EQ. The EQ that I use a lot is I'll use the Moog EQ, the EQ4, which I really like for the air band. But now there's this new plugin that Chris and I talked about yesterday, the Gullfoss Intelligent EQ, which is crazy good. So I'll put an EQ, and then it'll be a tape machine, and it'll either be the Slate Digital tape machine, or it could be the Abbey Road J37 tape machine, or the Studer, the ATR 102, the Universal Audio. And that's
Cool.
pretty much my master bus for the most part.
Then, can I use the master fader to do gain staging for getting the overall levels low? You can, but if you're clipping prior to your master bus, it's not going to solve that. That's the only thing I have to say about that. If your signal is way too loud to start with, bringing down the master fader is only going to bring down all the problems that you have. That's it. It's not going to get rid of all the peaking or, whatever. If your signal is way too hot, for example, if you're peaking, if some of your channels are already peaking, this is not going to solve that. So if you're clipping on one of the channels, it's still going to clip, but at a lower level overall. But that's it. So gain stage from the start, in my opinion, and leave that master fader to unity point at 0.
At 0, right.
On the fader,
Yeah.
So, anything to add on that, Dave?
No, you're 100% right. I try to keep the master fader never leaves the 0 unity, almost never. And even my groups or my buses, they stay at 0. The only things that move are the individual tracks. But when I gain stage, I probably just like you, Chris, is I put every fader at 0. And then I'll use a trim plugin or a clip gain plugin, or I'm not sure how Cubase does it, but in Studio One, there's clip gain, and I will clip gain things before. So I want to be whatever that is, -12, -10, -18 with the fader at 0. And then I just use the faders as you do to just balance the stuff.
Because, if we stick to gain staging, reality is if you record your signal at -5 or -3 dBFS, it's not wrong. It's okay. Right. You're still below the 0 point, and that's what's important. Now, once you have those tracks and those recordings into your session and you're ready to mix, this is where, like David was saying, the use of clip gain or the gain knob that we have in Cubase on top of clip gain, just to bring your levels down and gain stage that back to -18, -15, or whatever. But recording per se at a higher level, it's not a bad. It's not negative.
No.
It doesn't matter as far as you're not peaking. I tend to still record at a lower level, but
yeah, I mean, as long as you don't clip, you're okay.
Exactly,
Digital-wise, you don't have to record hot like we did in the analog days. But I always try to record -10, -12, just somewhere.
Exactly.
I'm always one. Let's be conservative, and you could always turn things up if they're a little too low. Once you got digital clipping, to get rid of it, you can't. I mean, there's some fancy tools out there that you might be able to fix a thing here or there, but you're better off just, if it's too low at the end, then we turn it up, but start conservative.
All right, Ross is saying, he adds a comment, back in the day, everything was recorded with 2 compressors. Then in mix, you may add another one. So in effect, you had multiple compressors on each track. That's a good point. And also in today's recording reality, a lot of people will record with compression and will record with analog gear. So analog gear is still on the market. A bunch of people are going to still buy some analog gear compressors, EQs, and so on. And it's not always to mix. I think mixing in the box has way more advantages than mixing in analog, just for a bunch of reasons, presets and, saving your session and so on. But recording with compression, if you know what you're doing, is pretty cool. Trying to get closer to what you want to have, you want to end up with directly at the source and commit. is something that can be an advantage, and that's a reality for a lot of high, top engineers when
Mhm.
they end up, mixing a song that comes from a professional recordist. It will be recorded so well that
Mhm.
it's going to mix itself,
That's right.
because everything
Mhm.
was all planned in advance while recording, kind of thinking of the mix while you're recording. But you need to know your tools, you need to know how they sound, how they react, and you need to be gentle if you want to do so. It's not something that I would suggest, anyone to do right off the bat, and going there blindly. It's something you can experiment with, though, to try to
Yeah.
learn what you work with. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good
certainly.
point, actually.
That's a great point. And also, too, all these plugins we're talking about, even if it's not a compressor, remember what we said a few minutes ago, a tape machine is a compressor. An analog channel strip is a compressor. It's emulating a piece of analog gear. Analog gear in and of itself, when signal goes through it, will add a compression-like effect, right? So
Hmm.
if you're running your signal through a tape machine, through a console emulator, through a channel strip, through another compressor, out a master bus on another compressor and another tape machine, you've in essence put 7 layers of compression on that one track. You may have done it in very small bits, but you have 7 layers of effectively compressing the signal. So the one thing you want to be careful with is not to over compress the track or the song, because then you lose all the punch, all the dynamic range.
Exactly.
And one of the top things that I hear from someone who's new to mixing is over compression, as they
Yeah.
compress the daylights out of everything. And there's a reason for that. The reason why the compression is the number one problem with amateur mixing, or people who are starting out, and we were all there. Me and Chris were there too. No one was born that knew how to do this. We learned it over many years. The reason why compression is the number one problem, it's the hardest thing for someone new to engineering to hear audibly. And the only way you audibly hear it when you're new is to over compress it. And
Hmm.
then you hear the difference when you turn, you go, oh, that's what a compressor does. But now you've squashed the signal, 15 dB
Exactly.
when you should have squashed it 3 dB. So over time, your ears will get in tune to when you can hear subtle compression. And that just takes time to learn how to do.
Yeah,
So yes,
I'm gonna
yeah.
link a video in the comment later after the stream. I actually made a video on that, on how to hear compression.
Oh, there you go. Yep.
Okay,
There you
so
go.
it's exactly what I do in the video. I overdo it, and I point you
Right.
out to a few things to pay attention to. Go watch this video. This is going to help a lot. And also, you can download my free cheat sheet on compression.
There you
Okay,
go.
so mixdown.online/compression. You're going
Hmm.
to get right into it.
That's awesome. And then once you hear that, and that's I always tell my students, it's the first aha moment. And when you
Hmm.
finally hear that compression and you go, now I know what to tune my ear into, your whole life changes in a good way when it comes to mixing, because now you've just unlocked the door to, oh, now I know why Chris uses an 1176 blue stripe on instead of the black panel, because I hear what the differences are. But when folks are new, they don't hear it. So they over compress it so they can hear it. And that's why the track is so over compressed. Because if you do that on every track, by the time you get to the master bus, the dynamics are gone in the song by that point. So yeah, so when you think about these kinds of plugins, realize that every one of these plugins is a compressor. Even if it's not a compressor, it acts like a compressor, and to be conservative with it. But when you're first starting out, like Chris says, go watch his video, exaggerate it, get in there with those plugins and overturn those knobs and let the thing distort and sound terrible, so you could start to tune your ear
Yeah,
to
don't
what
keep
it's
it this
supposed
way,
to
but
sound
just
like.
learn.
Don't leave it that way. Just learn. Yeah. And that's how you learn. That's how you learn, right? So yeah, that's great.
Exactly. Rick is saying, is asking, okay, do you like to track through a Neve plugins and mix on SSL plugins? Yeah, tracking with plugins. Let me show you something in Cubase, because I was about to, let me just add this to the stream. And this is another way, if you're lacking of CPU processing with your computer, you could, if you want to track with plugins. In Cubase, it's quite easy, because when we create an input bus, we have the channel right here on the mix console. Like if I click, I don't know if you, do you see this, Dave? the audio connection window that I have in front of me. I don't know if it's going to show on the stream.
No, no, I saw it a few
Okay,
seconds ago, but then
but
no.
you can create several inputs in Cubase, and the one that I have right here is the stereo in. On that channel, I can add plugins, so I can actually track with a tape emulation if I want to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that is going to record my signal with that effect printed directly with it. Okay, so that's something you can do. It's not something that I do now, but I did. When I wanted to use a bunch of the Studer plugin, for example, when I didn't had a bunch of I only had like a quad core from UAD, and I was always during mixing. I was always overloading the thing. I did track a bunch of recording using the Studer straight into the input of Cubase, so it can track and record with the signal to save CPU afterwards. So it's kind of committing directly while you're recording. But again, you need to know what you're getting into. You need to know what is going to be what that plugin is going to do to your signal. When
Right.
you record it. And if you like what you're hearing, you just keep it there and record with it.
There you
But
go.
again, it's like recording with analog gear. The only difference is that your signal has already been converted to digital, opposed to when you record with an analog piece of gear like a compression. It's going to do all the processing before your signal gets converted into digital.
Right.
But it can be done if this is something you want. This is not something that I do right now. But I used to when I had a slower computer. And then what's the difference between a brick wall limiter and a standard limiter?
I'm not sure. I mean, for me, the terms are pretty much the same. I mean, I don't call it, I don't think of it any differently. I think of a limiter as a limiter is the way I use a limiter. A limiter is a limiter. It's a limiter. And the way I would use it, maybe say at mastering or something to bring up overall volume. The way I understand a brick wall, it's like, you have a ceiling, you set the ceiling, and when it hits that point, whatever that's set at, it drives it straight down.
Yeah,
Where,
exactly.
Where a standard limiter or if I'm thinking of the question right, or like a compressor, we have a threshold and a ratio. As things go over the threshold, it only turns it down by a certain amount, where a brick wall completely squashes it. There's no going past the brick wall.
Exactly.
But I guess it depends on the plugin, right? I mean,
I think so too.
it depends on what their definition of it is. I think of when I think of limiter, I'm only using personally, I only use a limiter really at the final stage when I'm just trying to bring the level up of the overall track to say a commercial volume like mastering would do.
Now, Stereo Tactic is adding a comment here. If you like SSL, try the Soft Tube Console 1. And you can add more brands later if you want. Have you tried this? I
did years ago, and I didn't like it. But now
Okay.
I know there's been other newer revisions of the product, and it might be better. But I have not tried it. But I've heard people say I have a few students that use it and love it, but I haven't personally tried it.
I never tried it too, so
Yeah.
I couldn't tell. Now, Gotyor is saying there's a free one by Analog Obsessions console and Narcy, really good. Anyways, so there's a free option. If I never heard of that one,
Neither
as
have I.
far as a free plugin goes for console emulation. So take note, guys. I'm gonna check it out. If I can find it, I'm gonna leave the link in the comment section below. Then we have. Let me check here. Why not using the stock plugins and master them? Cubase offers a lot from that point of view. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think when you start mixing, I always suggest to learn what you have in your DAW. There's always everything you need. You're gonna have EQ plugins. You're gonna have compression plugins, saturation plugins, good delays, good reverbs. That's all you need. To go forward with the mix. And yes, Cubase, you work with Studio One, David. So, they all have very good stock plugins, and I totally agree with you. Epic Score. And actually, it's funny because I'm actually working on a mixing course in Cubase that is going to be released next month or the following. I'm kind of in the middle of production right now. And I'm mixing a couple of songs in that course only with Cubase plugins, and this course is going to be good, especially if you're a Cubase user. But even if you're a Studio One user or Pro Tools, it's all. I focus more on the concept of mixing more than the plugins.
Right, than the DAW.
Exactly. So
Right.
everything that you're going to be able to apply everything, whatever DAW you work with. But it's important to use to understand the concept of mixing and to understand what those tools are doing more than the blackface 1176 and
Right.
stuff. When you start mixing, just focus on what compression does, what
Right.
an EQ is going to do, and use the tools that you have already available into your DAW. And you'll be surprised when you know them pretty well how much of those you're always going to use, even if you have access to a bunch of other plugins.
Right. Yeah. And I my thought on this is, it's a good question, and he makes a good point. And here's why. So what you're right. Why not use stock plugins and master them? He's absolutely right. And I'm the same way. When I have newer students, newer to mixing, I say, and they'll ask me, what plugins should I buy? I say, don't buy any. Whatever DAW you're using, use those. Learn the basic fundamentals of EQ and compression first. There's other things, but those are the two main ones. And what you'll find is, depending on your DAW and whatever plugins, stock plugins they have, you're going to get good enough to a point where you're going to say, now I want something maybe a little different. Now, I didn't say better, I said different. And so, and this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. I think of these different plugins, not that they're better than the stock plugin, they sound different. Now, Cubase has a lot of really good plugin emulations of vintage gear. Not all DAWs have that. Some DAWs, most of their stock compressors and EQ are very transparent. You're not supposed to hear any difference. If it's a compressor, it just compresses. There's no tone, it just compresses. It doesn't imprint any other sonic characteristic, where these third-party plugins do. Where in Cubase, I know they have some vintage style plugin emulations of their own.
Tube compressor is one of them. The vintage compressor also very good compressor.
Yeah, it'll do some of that stuff for you inside of your stock plugin. But here's something interesting that I did is last year I did a course called Mixing Made Easy Volume 4, The Battle of the Plugins. And what I did was, for someone who asks this exact question, I took the same song, I mixed it from start to finish in real time, and they got to see the entire mix from start to finish, about 3 hours, with stock plugins only in Studio One. Then I did that same song, same mix it from start beginning to end, another 3 hours, with all of the UAD, Slate Digital, Waves, all the third-party stuff that I would typically use if I was mixing my own music. They got to see all those videos, and then I gave them the final high-resolution MP3 file of those things. And so when they purchased the course, not only did they get a chance to mix the song with me, because they get all the audio files like your courses are, but then they get to take the third-party plugin mix and the stock plugin mix, put it in your DAW, listen, everything's normalized, so the volumes are the same, and you listen to them and you decide, which one do you like? And there is no right or wrong answer. It was never about, is it better? It's different, and it's way different. So you have to decide. You may use all your stock plugins and go, you know what, this sounds great to me, and I like this, and there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to buy anything else, right? And then there's other people that say, hey, I love the way this sounds, but I want to change it up from time to time, and I want some different things, much like the painter with the different colors of blue on his palette, right? And that's all these plugins are. So that's why I created that course, and it was a hugely popular course because people got to see the real difference of stock versus third-party plugins.
And sometimes it's a workflow thing.
It's totally that. And
sometimes it's not the quality of the plugin.
It's not. And again, I always say it's not the gear, it's the ear. So it's how you use the gear or the plugin. It's not, this is just personal preference. Our topic is analog style plugins because that's what I personally happen to like. And Chris uses some of that stuff and we like that. But that does not mean, and I don't advocate or tell people you have to buy these kinds of plugins to get great mixes. No, you do not. You have to learn how to use EQ and compression first with any plugin before you're going to get a great mix. And then the only difference is, what do you like tonally? Is which one do you prefer? Do you prefer this or that? You know?
But it's another very good exercise to do when you're used to work with certain tools, with premium plugins like I do, and then you go from A to Z using only stock plugins.
Hmm.
You know, it's a bit of a challenge. I'll be honest with you. It
It's
took me a longer
harder.
time.
It's
Okay,
harder to mix that way.
it is because you're used to certain types of tools.
Right.
And I'm talking about Decapitator, for example, which
Love that
is a
plugin.
very good saturation plugin. I love this plugin also. And I use it all the time. And now I was mixing in Cubase. Okay, I'm going to have to replace to get close to that tone to what I get with Decapitator, you know? So I had to combine a
Hmm.
few different plugins in Cubase to get to this, to close, not even the same result, but you know, in the same ballpark, I
Yeah.
would say. So it took me a longer time to mix a song, but in the end, I'm listening to my mix, and actually, guys, I'm gonna leave the link below. But it's this song that I released 2 months ago, that was mixed entirely in Cubase with Cubase plugins, and I was very happy with the end result.
Hmm.
Okay, so
And it does.
um,
It makes you a better engineer. I always think of this too as it pushes you out of your comfort zone, like what it did for you in that example, and it makes you work harder to get the end result. You know, one thing about digital that I don't like, and one thing that I loved about being in an analog studio for real, mine is walking in and seeing all the cool gear. Put that aside,
yeah,
is that when you're working on a computer with a mouse and a trackball, or or a keyboard, I should say, it could be very you get a workflow, you have a process. It could be very mechanical. It could become very sterile. It could be like, okay, I'm using this plugin. I'm going to turn it here, and this is going to be my setting here, and nothing changes, and it becomes very routine. And after a while, I think if you do lots of mixing, you get stale that way. I feel, and that you lose some of that creativeness if you're always doing everything the same way. So
mhm,
by doing things like you just said, changing it up and saying, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to do something completely different. I'm going to
yeah,
force myself. It makes you critically listen more closely. You're training your ears a little bit better. You're thinking about things in a different way. And you're saying, how do I get these two Cubase plugins to sound like the Decapitator?
exactly.
Can it sound like that? I don't know. And you learn something along the way. You may find out that you like the stock plugin sound better than the Decapitator once you fooled with it in a certain way. Or you may say to yourself, you know what? Now I know why I want to go get that Decapitator plugin, because it does something that my current plugins can't do.
Yeah,
And so I just think it makes you a better engineer. It pushes you out of your comfort zone. Um,
definitely.
it makes you do things you wouldn't normally do, you know?
Vlad is asking, do you guys use True Iron from Kazrog?
I've heard of it, but I have never used it.
Okay, never heard of it. What is it?
It's like a saturator, if I'm
Okay.
correct. One of my students had mentioned it to me, but I've never tried it myself.
And 2 channel strips, that is illegal. Yeah, we need to stay
Mm.
legal. All right. If you're going into your master too hot, can you bring it down? Can you bring down the input level into that fader before inserts? On Cubase, I think it's pre-gain control, but it's not. But it's not great practice. We answered that with a previous question that was close to the same, but let me add a few things on that. Um, when you get into the master bus, even if you bring down the pre-gain of the master bus, it's not going to do anything, okay? Because you're just going to bring down whatever problems you already have into your mix. Now, the pre-gain or clip gain, if you want to use it, if you want to use the clip gain instead, you need to be careful when you play with that after you're done mixing or near the end of the mix when you already have some processing on your channel, because this is going to influence the amount of signal going into your chain. It's not going to affect the EQ plugins, but it will affect all the compressors and saturation plugins that will react to the amount of signal getting into those plugins. Okay, so you need to be careful with that. Gain stage, play with that gain level before, or else you're going to have to readjust the parameters of your compression and your saturation plugins. So something to pay attention to when working with gain staging using the pre-gain knob after the fact. After you insert a lot of plugins into that channel. So you're going to have to tweak that out if that happens. Then let me check what else do we have. Hi guys, a great stream. Did I understand that right? Is it a good idea to put a tape emulation plugin on every channel? Or on the master bus? Or only on the master bus? Thanks. What we're sharing today, like for the signal flow, it's not something that you have to do, on every mix. It's something that if you want to emulate an analog workflow,
Right.
this would be a very good start point. That would actually be the way to go, to start by using a tape machine on every single channels, more than buses.
Right. Yeah. On every, if you can, if your computer will allow it,
Yeah.
every channel, or if you can't, because the computer just can't handle it for whatever reason, then just do it on your groups instead of, or if you really can't do that, then you could just do it on your master bus, but ideally on every channel.
But again, it's not doesn't mean that you're going to be your mix is going to end up better. It's like
No,
if you want to emulate that
Right.
workflow.
Right. It can actually end up worse. One of the things about these third-party plugins, and this is so true, I make a joke with my students. I'll say, look, before you go, if you don't know how to use these plugins in the most effective way, and there is a little bit of a technique, if you will, on how to use these plugins as opposed to a stock plugin, that if you don't understand how to really use these in a most effective way, it'll hurt your mix more than it's going to help. So I said, one of the things that we all fall victim to, everyone, lots of us all fall down the plugin rabbit hole. Every company's out there making plugins. Every company's telling you that if you just buy this plugin, you're going to sound like Chris Lord Alge's mix or whoever your favorite mix engineer is. And so half of them have their own brand of plugins, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if you don't really understand how to use them and you don't understand the signal flow, that you can actually make the mix sound worse. Because putting a tape machine and a console emulator and a channel strip on every one of your tracks, you could be talking about 100 different plugins in your mix. And that can, if you don't have it set up right, if you don't gain stage it right, if you don't use them right, if you overuse them, the mix will sound worse than it did if you just used a few stock plugins, depending on how the stuff was recorded. So I always tell my students, look, before you go out, first thing, when I get an email, and I get it all the time, which plugin, blah, 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 ABC should I buy? First thing I want to know is how long you've been mixing. Do you understand how to use EQ and compression? If the answer to that question is yes, great. Before you buy a third-party plugin, and again, I'm not here to promote my courses. That's not why I'm here, but I have a whole course on that, how to mix with analog style plugins, because I teach you how to use them the most effective way and the history behind them and what they mean and a lot of things we're talking about today. So before you buy anything and just throw it into the soup and think it's going to sound great, you have to understand the technique on how to use them. And once you have that, then these plugins can open up a whole different set of possibilities for you.
Does anyone use a PCI card from UAD? Do you, Dave?
I used to use when I had a PC, but now that I'm on a Mac, I'm using the Apollo interfaces and the satellite systems. But I used to use PCIe, and they always worked fine for me when I
have both. I still have the PCI quad that I've been working with for years.
They work great.
And I installed it on my UPC. It works very well. And I also have the satellite 8-core Octo, so it does work very well. So because he's asking also about hardware versus PCI cards for stability. I don't see any differences as far as I'm concerned. So it both works very well. I'm actually looking on selling my PCIe card, so hit me up if you want to buy it. Okay, a bit of a discussion on UAD, whether you're using... So you work with UAD, Dave?
I do. I use a lot of their plugins. I tend to use, in my courses and stuff, I tend to stay away from them a little bit because most of my students don't have a UAD rig. And so... But yeah, I do. I like their stuff. I've been using UAD since way back when I started first using Universal Audio. There was no company called Slate Digital.
No, same here.
There was no plugin line. No one made the emulation of the old gear and plugins. UAD was probably, if not the first, certainly one of the first, and they certainly at that time did it the best. And so I've been using them since early 2000s. I mean, we're talking a long time ago.
Yeah, same here.
And so I've always stuck with them, and I just like them.
with the first PCI card,
Yeah, I
the
had
UAD1.
UAD1. That's what I had too, where you could put, you know, only a few plugins because you'd run out of DSP power after a while. But yeah, so I really like their stuff. But there's a lot of plugin companies today now that honestly, depending on the plugin, gives UAD a run for the money. I mean, there's a lot of great companies making lots of great plugins today. You don't have to have universal audio.
No, exactly. And some friends of mine actually are trying to stay away. You know, if especially when they're doing a lot of work remotely, and they bring their laptops with them,
Right,
and
you don't have the hardware, right?
mixing on the plane, or
Right.
on a remote location. If you can avoid to carry with you, your
Yeah,
an extra piece of gear to mix, it's always going to be better.
that's always good. The real advantage to UAD, aside from they do make great sounding plugins, but like we just said, there's lots of other companies that can compete with them from a sonic point of view, is that the plugins don't run on your CPU power. They
Yeah.
run on the DSP. So we were talking earlier about, well, what if I can't put 25 tape machines in my computer? Well, if you're using 25 UAD tape machines, it doesn't touch your computer's CPU. So
Yeah.
there's some advantage to that. So I guess it depends on, like you said, what you're doing.
But that's a good point, because of using UAD plugins, I was able to work with my old computer for more than 7 years.
Oh, right, because
Using the same PC,
right. So there is an advantage to it.
mixing big sessions and stuff. And I just like maybe a few months ago, bought a new computer. So my last one lasted for 7 years. That's in part because I was mixing with UAD plugins,
Right.
without using all the processing power off my computer.
Yeah, so I guess
So
it
that's a good
depends on
point.
what you're doing, and if you're
Exactly.
traveling a lot, if you're on a laptop and you're mobile, UAD
Yeah.
may not be the way to go.
Timo is adding some of my best mixes are done with Cubase stock plugins.
I would agree
Good
with
to know. Let me check what else do we have here. Got yours saying, I love the vintage compressor on Cubase, and tube compressor is amazing. I love Maximer, and Soft Clip, all daily workhorses of mine. Yeah, the vintage compressor, I'm actually made a video on the vintage compressor and also another one on the tube compressor. I'm going to link those below also. They are very good compressors, and it's cool that we have those compressors part of Cubase.
Yeah, that's great.
And then, what is the mix course name he is talking about? I don't know
the
if
one
it's
I
about
mentioned earlier?
your course or maybe my course. My course is not out yet. It's going to be. I'll just make sure you're on my mailing list to get access to the course when it's going to come out. But what about you, Dave?
The one I was talking about was Mixing Made Easy Volume 4, The Battle of the Plugins. Although there are a ton of Mixing Made Easy courses on my website, but that particular one is the comparison between stock plugins and third-party plugins.
All right. Let me check. What else do we have? Yeah. I'm a bit further away from the
Are you?
microphone. Yeah, I need to to work on my mic stand next time I do the stream.
Yeah,
I can get
I'm sorry.
closer.
I'm so used to being up close for my videos that I should be sitting back a little further.
Yeah,
Sorry about
exactly.
that.
Hey, Chaz is in. He was on last week as my guest. True Iron is a very nice transformer emulation. That's good to know, Chaz. Okay, let me check. Do you emulate the full analog signal path with analog style plugins?
Yeah, I do when I mix. Yeah, or as much as I possibly can.
But you could use. I'm brainstorming at the same time reading the question. Yeah, for sure. If we're talking about tape emulation plugins or console emulation plugins, for sure. But if you want to emulate also, the channel strip, you can use the Cubase channel strip. It's not an emulation of a specific channel strip, but it's going to give you a two different types of compressors and also an EQ, and all, a gate also, everything that you find on a regular channel strip. So you can add that also. Okay, then do you use a stereo widener on your master bus? Good question. Do you, Dave?
I do. I use the universal audio. It's not a stereo widener, but that's what you perceive it to be when you hear it. It's called the Precision K Stereo plugin
Okay.
by the mastering engineer Bob Katz, and that is, they call it an ambient recovery plugin, but what it sounds like when you put it on there is a stereo widener. And what I like about it is you can also work with the mid side. And so what I do is I'll automate that in the verses. It's a little bit more narrow, and then I can automate it to spread out in the choruses and that kind of thing.
Cool.
The thing about stereo wideners that I always found, because I've had a few in the past, I think I had Waves, a few others, is if you don't use them very sparingly, things can sound really weird and phasey, because
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because your first thought is to just take it and just spread it out as far as it'll go. They make it as wide as it can, and you don't want to do that. But yeah, that's what I use. So I guess it's a stereo widener. At least that's what it kind of makes you feel like you're hearing.
Okay. Isotope has a free one, a free stereo imager that is actually very, very good. And this is the one I use. And if not, I'm going to use the one. It's part of a Plugin Alliance plugin. I forgot the name.
Oh, I know what you're talking. I haven't tried it, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that also is a very good one, and it's not phasey at all. But the Ozone one is not the Ozone, but the Isotope one, the free one, is actually very impressive.
I'll have to try it. Never tried it. I'll have to try it.
Yeah, but it's always the thing about phasing if you do it too much, But I usually don't go past 15%, 18% of widening, What do you think about T-Rax?
I purchased one of their bundles during the Black Friday sale 2019. I started to use it and did some reviews for it. There's a handful of plugins in the bundle I like. The majority of them, compared to the other stuff I already have, didn't really impress me all that much. But again, it's funny. It's just an opinion, because I have 3 or 4 students in my membership site that love the T-Rax bundle. Love it. Will tell me every day how wrong I am, how they love the way they think sound. And it's, so I think they're okay, but I wasn't like blown away by them, but I have other students that love them,
Yeah, I got a copy of the T-Rax bundle a few years ago. I made a mastering video on that years ago. It does work very well. They have some good plugins. And you can get the full bundle for not too expensive, I think.
Wasn't a lot. I think I paid maybe $140 during their sale, and you got I don't know, a whole bunch of plugins, including 4 or 5 tape. I will say their tape machines were really good, but their tape machines were extremely CTU intensive. So I couldn't put 30 of those I could put it on the master bus, and that was about it. You could not put a bunch of them in your session. But they sounded really good.
I don't use them much. I have them, but I don't reach.
I find you have maybe 15 plugins you always go to.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm used to the one I work with.
Right.
But so, at some point you need to stick to what you know best.
Right.
So you get the best results. Then we have Renato. Should a mic emulation plugin, example the Slate VM1, go before preamp compression plugins on your in-the-box channel?
I would think so. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I never work with these types of microphone and plugins, but I would definitely put them before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I've never used the Slate stuff, but I've heard it's really good. I've never used it though.
And then a comment from Ross. 30 years ago, we tried our best to get rid of distortion. Now I spend most of my time adding distortion.
Right.
That's funny, but it's so true. Yeah, right. At some point, when digital was a new thing and people were getting into more and more, into the digital recording and production, it has a clean sound, It has a very, very clean sound. And that was it was translated as, this is the new sound and this is kind of what we're aiming for. And now it's like the complete opposite, We need to go back to a bit more of an organic and analog type sound that is,
Well, yeah, because you're right. Because when digital first came along, no one really realized when all you had was analog and there was a recording process, and I think he mentioned about the noise and the distortion, and you would record really hot in the analog world,
Yeah.
and people, the reason why you did that is because you didn't want to hear the noise flow, you didn't want to hear the tape hiss. So
Mhm.
you would have to record hot to get up the signal to noise ratio, to get above the noise. But what people didn't realize, no one really realized until digital and digital audio workstations, is that the gear in and of itself, the compressors, the tape machines, the console in particular, all had a character to the sound of the overall music. And until they removed that and made everything digital, you didn't realize what you didn't know. And then people said, why does everything kind of sound sterile? And why does everything, I don't know exactly what it is. It sounds clean and it sounds pristine, but it doesn't have that thing. No one even knows what that thing is. They just go, that thing, it just doesn't sound like the records that I grew up on and the records that I liked, or the vinyl that vinyl's making a big resurgence now. The vinyl, it doesn't sound like my records. The reason why it doesn't sound like your records is because that gear, the analog, imprinted sonic characteristics on audio in a pleasing way. And some of that is distortion, good harmonic distortion, which is much different than digital distortion. So once that was recognized, then every company's racing it's the race to come up with the next analog style plugin. And that's why they're so popular. There's a reason why these plugins are popular. Yeah, they look pretty and the interface looks nice and it looks sexy, and have a tape machining, you see the wheels spinning around and stuff. But you know what I mean? But really what it is, it imprints a sonic characteristic to the audio that is not there when you don't have it. And that's why people tend to use them. But as we've been saying this whole time, there's a right way to use that stuff and there's a wrong way to use that stuff. And
Exactly.
so so now everyone's trying to put distortion back on the lead vocal, where before you'd be like, why would you ever put distortion on a lead vocal? Have you, I don't think there's been a mix I've done in the last 5 years that doesn't have distortion on a lead vocal in a very subtle way that you don't even hear it.
Yeah.
But if you were to take it away, you notice that it's gone.
But that's one of the reasons why older engineers had a lot of problems and trouble to switch fully to in-the-box mixing, just because of...
Yeah, most of them still do. Most of them will do a hybrid fashion. There are very few engineers that are fully in the box. There's a few. There's a
more
few.
And more, though. More and more.
There's a few.
Chad Blake, Andrew Sheps.
Andrew Sheps.
Like that,
There's a few. But then you said it earlier, Chris. You made a really good point. I don't know if people caught it. Was you also got to understand, these guys that are completely in the box, they're working with tracks that are not recorded out of someone's home studio. Some people like us, amateurs that are just, you're getting wonderfully recorded tracks, beautifully recorded tracks. A lot of that time, a lot of those tracks are recorded with some analog gear. It's not, Andrew Sheps is not mixing records that were recorded at home through a $99 audio interface and then mixing all in the box and saying, well, you can mix all in the box. No, he's mixing world-class musicians recorded in really nice studios most of the time with really good recording engineers, with some really good instruments, really good gear, and also obviously amazing players.
Yeah.
So when he gets the track in the box and he pushes up his faders in Cubase, it sounds awesome. I think you said it earlier. It mixes itself. Then the plugins almost become, whether it's a Waves plugin or whether it's a piece of hardware, it almost doesn't matter. The track sounds great to begin with. But most of us home studio guys don't work with those kinds of tracks. We're working with tracks that weren't always recorded in the most ideal situation without the best gear. And so some of these plugins will also help some of that to bring it up to a little bit higher level.
Exactly.
So
that's why the recording stage is a very important stage. And I think a lot of new engineers and the musicians that are self-producing their music, they will not pay too much attention to the quality of the recording. They're going to aim for, okay, let's fix it at the mix. Saying that's the worst thing possible. You need to, to straight up on the recording stage to work that out so it sounds the best possible with the gear that you have. If it's only your interface with that input, make sure you have like good mic placement, good performance. Make sure you record the best quality take ever, so this is super, super important.
Yeah.
You're not going to fix a bad performance or a bad mic placement in the mix.
No,
It's gonna be hard.
70% of a wonderful mix, 70 to 75% of a great mix is a great recording.
Exactly.
It really, truly is.
Rick is asking, do you have a favorite Unison plugin for UAD? I don't work with, I don't have a UAD interface, but you do, Dave.
Yeah, I do. I use all their channel strips is my favorite one. I record through their Neve channel strip, their API, and their
Cool.
SSL. So yeah.
Awesome. David is asking how to master a song in Cubase with Cubase stock plugins. I made an older video. If you look on my channel, I'm going to link it below after the stream. It's called Simple Mastering. Go on my channel, look for Simple Mastering, and it's a quick mastering that I did in Cubase with Cubase plugins. I am overdue to do a second version of that, so I'm going to work on. It's on my list anyway, so to work on. Then Chaz is saying for Reaper users, there is a feature called remote that lets you use a second Reaper computer as a plug-in DSP like you would use UAD hardware. That is pretty cool.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that.
No, same here. But Reaper is very interesting. It's an interesting DAW. There's a bunch of stuff like that, a bit more geeky type of thing that you can do that you don't see a lot on any other DAW. So it's kind of unique in that sense. Cool. Good to know that. Thanks, Chaz. How do you often hold these live mix sessions? It's on my YouTube channel. They're going to stay there for, as far as I have a YouTube channel. So I have a playlist called Mixdown Live, I believe, or just live streams. Check the playlist. I put all of my live sessions into that playlist. So, do you consider tracking through at least a plug-in preamp? And if not, also a plug-in channel strip, best practices? Assuming no outboard gear, yeah. I don't. I used to, but I don't because I have a bunch of gear that I can record through, good preamps and even have that mixing console. I don't use it to mix, but I do use the preamps when recording drums, especially where I tone shape the sound with the EQ that's on that console, and I can drive the console a bit also to get a bit saturation out of that board, which is quite cool, honestly, when tracking drums. So I don't use any plugins when recording and print with those plugins. That I don't, but I used to, like I explained earlier. I don't know if you were attending the stream while I was talking about that, but yeah. That can work out, if you have a DSP, if you have DSP limitations, that can work out, so.
Yeah, or if you want to get a universal audio, they make the small little interface, the little desktop interfaces now where you can use, someone asked a few seconds ago, the Unison technology. That is what the Unison technology allows you to do. It lets you to record through a universal audio 1073, for example, Neve preamp, through a compressor, through an EQ, and then commit to the sound and print it into Cubase. So when you get to mixing, all that stuff's already on there, so you don't have to, the mixing will be maybe a little bit easier, a little bit more streamlined. So you can do that. That's another way to do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't have the Unison or UAD interfaces, but I do have the URRT4 from Steinberg, which has a DSP with, a couple of plugins available for monitoring when recording, and also you can print and record through them, and same for the AXR4. And something I want to add, though, when recording with compression or EQ, if you can, because it's actually good, especially with a singer. It's not a bad thing to record with compression, only if it's only for monitoring issues, on a monitoring purpose, to get the singer the best mix possible. When a singer sings through compression, the performance might be different in a good way. It's going to feel way better for the singer, when he sings with he has the perfect EQ mix and also good compression going on, movement going on when singing. He's probably going to perform differently. And there's ways you can connect, you can record both signals. You can record a signal with compression and also the same signal on a separate track, clean, so you have both. Or if you're using UAD interfaces or the AXR4, URRT4 from Steinberg, you can just monitor with compression and record a clean signal. So,
Yep.
what about Easy Mix? I heard about that. I never tried it though.
Yeah,
Have
Tune
you?
Tracks, I've tried it. Yeah, it's,
What's that about?
so basically what it is, it is a way to mix where you don't really have to know much about EQ, all the things we're talking about. It's almost like using presets, but what they call them is signal chains. So for example, if you were mixing a vocal, you would go down through their list and pick vocals, and it'll have a chain already, set up for you with a compressor and EQ with some basic settings to kind of get you in the ballpark. Some of it's okay. The problem, here's what I'll say about the Easy Mix and anything like that. Waves also makes some of these all-in-one plugins like Easy Mix, like the CLA or the Tony
Yeah.
Maserati bundle, where you just put it on the track and pick a preset and it's supposed to be good. It's so dependent on the program material that you're putting it on, that it'll get you into the ballpark. So if you're someone who's just making some demos, or you're a musician and you're trying to write some songs and you just want to have something that sounds decent that you can use for a collaborative effort or something like that, I think those things are great. I think you don't want to know much about engineering. You don't want to get into the geeky side of things. You don't want to know about compressors and what's a ratio and what's a threshold and attack and releasing. You don't care about that. You're just a musician and you just want to put something on your tracks that'll make it sound decent. Those things are great. But there is there's limitation to what you can do with them. It doesn't always sound good depending on what the program material is and how it was recorded. And so then you say, well, how do I get it better? This is where you really have to get into the nitty gritty of learning the craft of mixing. So I think it has its place. Easy Mix is a decent product. I've used it. Certain things it sounded okay on, other things not so much. I actually bought it because I was intending on making an entire course around it. How to mix with presets made easy or something like that. One of my, crazy courses. and the problem that I never did the course because I couldn't find enough stuff to use it on in a mix to make the mix sound decent.
That's the thing with presets.
It's
That's
okay.
where I have a hard time with presets, especially with EQ presets, which for me doesn't make sense,
right?
And compression presets. When it comes to delays and reverbs, they're great.
Yeah, I use a lot of
very good start
reverbs
point.
and delays, so just pick a preset and go.
Same here. When it comes to compression and EQ, especially, it's like,
it is.
How
so
does the
dependent.
system know what type of vocal you recorded? And what is the amount of signal coming into the compressor? It's like
it doesn't
make
know.
any sense.
It doesn't know, and that's why those people ask me a lot about how do I EQ a female vocal? It's like, oh boy, well.
There's
Depends.
no answer.
The
Like, it
vocalist, the
depends.
microphone, the preamp, what day of the week was it? How far away was she from the microphone? What kind of music is it? There's a million variables for me to begin to tell you how to EQ a female vocal. And so, some presets will work if you're lucky, but most of the time, not usually.
Yeah, most of the time it's not going to work. There's the microphone selection to consider, the vocalist,
everything.
the tone of the voice, the way it was recorded, the preamp,
room, the room she was in. How the engineer set up the preamp to record. Everything.
The key of the song, was it too high for that singer? How there's a bunch of stuff to consider.
Right.
A preset is not going to take. That is not going to consider that.
No.
What is your current go-to stock and third-party plugin that has to be used that you use every time? Instrument and effect. Good question.
That's a great question.
Want to start?
Oh, sure. Third party would be the Virtual Console collection. I want that on every mix, no matter what. If I had no other thing, stock plugin, an EQ. It could be EQ to me is the most important plugin of anything. It's the most important tool we have as a mix engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So do I have a go-to stock plugin? Not really. I don't tend to use stock plugins, but if I had to, which one I would take? Just a standard old Cubase EQ or the Studio One EQ. And then I want the Virtual Console collection.
Okay.
Those are my two go-tos.
For me, I would say, as far as premium plugins go, the third-party plugin that I use the most is Echo Boy by Soundtoys.
Oh, love it. That's my favorite.
So like for delays, that is always the first delay plugin I'm going to reach to before trying something else.
Right.
And as far as stock plugins, um, most of the time I'm going to use the filter from the channel strip in Cubase, the high pass and low pass filter that is pre-insert and pre-everything. So
Right.
I'm going to reach for that instead, because I used to work also with the Pro Q3 from Fab Filter. I love that EQ.
Love it.
Not because it sounds better than the stock plugin EQ in
Nope.
Cubase, but it's the workflow is better for me anyways. But as far as the high pass and low pass filter goes, it's so fast and efficient to use the one in Cubase that I have on every channel. Like, and I'm gonna add one more, and it's Very Audio. So I don't use Melodyne. I'm gonna use Very Audio, which is also part of every
Cubase.
channel in
Right.
Cubase. So
Right.
this is like a wonderful, powerful tool that I use all the time when I'm gonna edit vocals. So that would be my choice. And then, hi guys, please tell how can I get my instruments wide and big without sounding bad?
That's almost
That's
like
why we have YouTube channels.
yeah. That's almost like what preset do I use to EQ vocals? Panning obviously would be the first thing I would say. You get your panning, oh, here's something here's a panning tip. I don't think that's not a trick. It's a tip. A lot of people think about panning. They think either center, left, right. And there are certain engineers that will only pan center, left, right. They're famous engineers. That's just the way they work. Depending on the mix, depending on the instrumentation, one thing you can consider is between the center and the far left or the far right. So in other words, if I have a mix where I have lead vocals, 2 acoustic guitars, 4 sets of electric guitars playing different parts, distorted and clean, and keyboards, okay? I'm not going to pan. I'm not going to put the vocal. I'm going to put the vocal up the center, obviously, but I'm not going to put acoustic guitars hard left, right, electric guitars all hard left, right, keyboards all hard left, right, because now everything is sitting and competing on the far left, right. And so what I might do is I might put the vocal in the center. I'll put the acoustic guitars maybe 30% over to the left and right. Then the electric guitars will go 50% over to the left and right. And then the other electric guitars may go 70% left and right. And now I've covered the whole panning spectrum with instrumentation. And that sometimes, depending on it really depends, that will sometimes give the mix a little bit bigger feel, a little wider feel, where you're not so, also too, when you do hard left, right, I know most people listen to stuff in stereo, earbuds, headphones, speakers, but also think when you're sitting in a car, for example, you're not sitting in the middle. You're driving to one side. So you're not hearing things perfectly in stereo. You got to think about some mono sources as well, as how does that mix start to fold down? If you just go everything hard left, right, and then it starts to fold down, depending on the speaker you're listening to it, you can miss instrumentation and things can sound very thin. So I try to spread things out a little bit more to cover all of that. It doesn't always work, but that's one thing you can do that I don't hear people talk about much.
I'm going to add to this, start by recording the parts on purpose to have a wide sound. If you're recording guitars and you're looking to have like that wide chorus, make sure you record. We made a recording guitar video last week with Chaz. And yeah, I would say make sure you record. You can double your guitars while recording with different parts, different voicings, and pan them, all types of different stuff that can be done from one track to the other with the same instrument is going to add wideness also to your mix. So that those decisions can be done before starting to mix.
Right.
So I'm a big fan of mixing while you record.
Yeah.
In that sense. So you record parts accordingly to what you want the end result to be,
Right.
So that can be another thing to consider.
That's a great point.
I want all the plugin developers to make sure they put a mix knob on every plugin, even EQ, please.
A lot of them are doing it now. A lot of them are using the mix to blends. A lot of them are doing that.
The problem with EQ though is phasing issues.
Right. But on compressors, lots of companies are doing it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Very, very practical for sure. Okay, about pushing inputs on analog versus digital. While it's not needed for digital, some AD converters sound more brilliant when pushed harder. Yeah, for sure.
That's
Yeah, you're
absolutely
right.
true. I just did a video on that. On the video topic was do I need to upgrade my converters? And I talked about that exact point.
Okay.
That certain converters, again, if you have, and good converters don't come cheap, by the way. So,
we're not talking about $100
no,
sound card
no,
converter.
no. When you're talking about an audio interface at say $100, $200, $300 versus an audio interface with the same amount of inputs, preamps, and as a $2,500 interface, where that biggest difference will usually be in the converter. And does the converter have enough headroom to hit it harder? Most converters that are in the more affordable range do not. And so, but that point is absolutely right. If you have the right converters, you can hit them a little harder and they will sound a little bit better.
Yeah. And again, it's about knowing your gear.
Yeah, really understanding what the limitations are of the gear.
Exactly. And how can you bring that to your advantage? Does each DAW has a different sound, or is that a myth? That is a very good question. Listen, I think they all sound the same to start with. But, I had discussions with, very good engineers that will tend to differ on that. And so I cannot assure you 100% that they sound different, but you know what? Just talking about David Wyatt, that was on the show a month ago. Not David, but Daniel Wyatt. Listen, for him, Cubase sounds way better than Pro Tools, and he explained to me why. And I found it actually interesting, and maybe he's right, So I never tested myself. I don't know how you can actually test it, but I'm not gonna, I'm gonna be an in-between. I never tested it, so I don't know. I tend to say they all sound the same, but some will say otherwise. What about you, Dave? What do you think?
I have every DAW that's on the market, including Cubase version 10.5 Pro. I use them all for one reason or another, for different courses, for teaching purposes. I've never heard a difference between all the DAWs. Personally, I know people that will say the same thing you just said, and will
so I'm not alone then.
That will swear to you that they sound different.
Yeah,
but that kind of goes. That is just like when people talk about analog summing, right? Some people will swear that analog summing audibly there's a difference, and some people will say that's all hype. The digital audio workstation could do the summing. There is no sound difference. I don't know. I
exactly.
think don't buy a DAW for the way you think it, or someone told you the way it sounds. Buy the DAW.
No, at all.
Buy the DAW because you enjoy the workflow.
Exactly.
Or like if you're following Chris and you like Chris as an instructor, well, he uses Cubase. So if you're looking for a DAW, you probably want to buy Cubase. If you're following me or somebody else who uses a different DAW, then it may just be easier for you to use a different DAW because the people that you know or the people that you follow use that DAW. They all do the same thing. And I think they all sound the same, or if they are different, they are so subtly different. I don't know that anyone can really hear the difference.
That's what I think too.
I'd love to talk to, was it Daniel who said that?
Yeah.
I'd love to know what his theory
is. He swears he hears a very good difference.
Maybe he does. I don't know. Maybe he does. If he could prove it to me, I'd love him to teach that to me, because I would love someone to be able to show me how it's different, but maybe it is.
Now, Chaz is adding to what we discussed earlier. If you're willing to commit to a sound, you can always print the track with the tape or console emulation, and then remove the plugins to free up processing power on your computer, for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure. Then Judia is asking, what do you do when all your tracks keep getting out of sync? Why does it happen? I don't know if you're still here on the stream and you have like you have more details on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You can add that up in the comment section, because right off the bat, I don't have an answer for you. But then David is thanking us because he's learning very much. Cool.
Oh, good. That's great.
That is very, very cool. Then the Dark is adding, is it okay? No, he's asking, is it okay to write or make an important things sheet of the techniques you learn while mixing every track, just to keep everything checked while mixing next time. Yeah, that's a good habit
Absolutely.
to take for sure. If something works out, you can actually save a preset of your channel if you want, depending on
Hmm.
the DAW. But most DAW will allow you to save an entire channel preset,
Hmm.
and you can save your presets, and that could be your starting point next time. And also, I'm a big fan of mixing templates.
Hmm.
You and I have a free course on that, anyways. On if you want to check it out, the link is in the description down below, anyways. And it's just a matter of speeding things up next time you mix, especially if you're mixing an album, a full album for a
Right.
client or for yourself, and you want to keep the same tone and same type of mixing from song to song. That is, building yourself a template out of the first song you mix and then apply that as a starting point for the following songs is a very
Mhm.
good way to go. And I do have my own mixing template. And the way I work that out, I am gonna load my empty session with all of my. It's mainly a routing template that I use, and I have also a bunch of plugins already loaded that are all bypassed.
Mhm.
And then I'm gonna add them up. Everything's gonna go according to the recording that I'm mixing, also. But I do
Right.
have all of my same instrument buses loaded with my usual plugins. Same for the mix bus and stuff. They're all bypassed, but they are there,
Mhm.
so it speeds up my workflow.
Yeah, I have some courses where I include a 12-step mixing cheat sheet process for people to, here's kind of a workflow, like you said, a specific workflow. And depending on the course, I encourage them, I tell them, print it out, put it in front of your computer station. So every time when you mix, you kind of follow these steps, and then it'll not only will you not forget anything, obviously, but it'll also give your mixes from mix to mix a sound of consistency, because you'll have a workflow and just a way of doing things, and you'll start to have a consistent way your mixes sound.
Yeah. We're saying the same topic here. Do you have any go-to channel bus or group bus chain presets? If I'm not saying this correctly, I mean where on a channel or group bus, you can load all your typical inserts and plugins that you'll use. Yeah, that can happen. I mainly work with a template, and so I don't have a lot of channel presets, just because that with Cubase, you can import a channel from any project. So I have my regular Cubase mix template project. And
Mhm.
if I'm, let's say, or, on a mix, I just created myself a new type of effect that I want to import on a new mix. I can just drag it up directly from that session into Cubase, and I'm good to go. Or I can save that as a preset if I want to. But that is doable, and it's a good way to speed things up. How to get a wide vocal on dynamic mic. Um, Whether you're recording your vocal with a dynamic or a condenser microphone, it's still going to be a mono signal.
Right.
I don't think one is going to be wider than the other. So this is going to be the wideness part of it is going to be done afterwards with the space you're going to put the vocal into to start
Mhm.
with, and there's several other things you can do. I made a video that is called the vocal widening effect.
I
That
think I
is
saw that.
based,
Yeah.
yeah, and this one is based, and I made the same a Cubase version on the Produce Like a Pro, the Warren Ewart YouTube channel, also, where you get like that mono microphone, and with some sort of doubling effects, you can
Mhm.
add blend that up with the original signal just to add a bit more wideness to the vocal. This is for a lead vocal. When we're talking about back vocals, it's the same for guitars. You want to wide things up, you can double the take, and even with a lead vocal, you can double
Yep.
or triple or quadruple the same line,
Yep.
and you can pan those up. It depends on how wide you want that to sound like. But
Right.
doing a lot of stuff during the recording stage and the arrangement stage also
Mhm.
can do the trick, and
Yeah.
can bring your life easier during the mixing stage. So it all depends. Anything to add on that, Dave?
No, I think you said it great. It's not the microphone. It's all done after. Post is where
Yeah.
it's at. And usually most times vocal tracks, you may record a vocal, but like you said, in mixing, by the time we're done, there could be 3, 4, 5 duplicates, and each one of those duplicates has different effects on them. Um, panned, like you said. And a lot of times I'll put reverb on a vocal and I'll may pan the reverb, you know, where where it's not right up the center. That kind of spreads
Mhm.
things out a little bit too. Or using like, you know, two delays, stacking delays, a quarter note and an eighth note, and then offsetting them a little bit. So you get that kind of width.
Oh,
The-
delay is great to do that
yeah.
kind of stuff for sure.
And it could be so subtle that you don't even know there's a delay on the vocal. The vocal could still sound very dry, but all of a sudden the vocal sounds bigger for some reason. And it's, you know, so a lot of that's done after the recording.
Yeah. But that's a good tip. You know, the delay tip, the stereo delay with, you know, each side's a bit offset from each other. That helps a lot too. Chaz is asking, another panning tip is to automate your pans. You can make a chorus or hook pop or get tighter with automation pans on some of the tracks.
That's right.
For sure. That's a good one, Chaz. All right. And oh, yeah, Agent K is adding, I once did a blind mix test for a studio engineer, Cubase, Ableton, Pro Tools. He got all wrong.
Yeah. I think if you
Yeah,
guess,
you know.
I think it's a lucky guess. If you guess right, it was luck.
Exactly. Hey, guys, don't forget to like this live stream. Now we're going to wrap this up pretty soon. So if you have any last questions, add them on because we are going to wrap this up very soon. So let's go to the next one. Russ is asking, why don't the plugin makers use modern settings on their analog emulations? Why limit me to 2 or 4 dB of boost on my API if 550? Most people have never used the original. A threshold or a threshold on the LA2A. But, you know, if they do, so it's not going to be a full emulation. Like
Right,
the
and that's
LA2A,
the-
for example, it's not a threshold-based plugin compressor. It doesn't work this way. So, you know, there's plugins with a regular type plugin. Digital compressor will have a threshold, but a lot of vintage type compressors are not going to be. They're going to have a fixed threshold, like the LA2A or the 1176, and it's going to depend on the input, the amount of input that you get into the compressor that will determine how gain reduction you'll get. Or else it's not going to be an emulation if they do add a lot of modern tweaks, you know. So that's why we have digital compressors that are part of a lot of DAWs anyways.
Yeah, there are some companies that that are doing some of this kind of thing. There's a company called Overloud Plugins that
Never
they
heard of
have.
them.
Yeah, they're pretty good. I've done some reviews on my YouTube channel of them where they'll have their 1176, for example, and then you can click a button, and it opens up a rack below the plugin with some extra features that weren't part of the hardware that you can choose or not to use or not use.
Okay.
Which is pretty cool. And in certain instances, it's like, okay, that could be very useful. But they're the only company I know that really does that. I'm sure there's probably others.
But Empirical Labs did that with the Arouser, you know. That is a kind of a distressor emulation in a way, but with more features.
Right.
And that is actually pretty interesting. What they did, you know, they actually kept the same bass. It's still a fixed threshold compressor.
Yeah.
But they added more features as far as desaturation goes and, you know, and stuff like that, you know. So next, what do we have? What did the other engineer, Daniel, say? I am also interested in what other engineers debates. Okay. It's probably referring to something else earlier in the chat. That's a good one. How many times you guys listen to your mix before exporting?
Oh, before it's done?
Before it's done. When do you know? You know, okay. When do I know that a mix is done? Is that when I listen to it, when I feel that the mix is done, I'm going to take a break. I'm just going to get back to it the following day. When I listen to my mix with a fresh pair of ears, and the only thing that I need to do are minor tweaks like 0.5 dB on the vocal or, you know, on an EQ or stuff like that, I know that my mix is done.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty much, I'll do, I'll never export a mix, especially for a client, without giving myself a 24-hour break.
Oh, yeah.
I usually will build that into my lead time. How long does it take? It's however long it takes plus a day. So I can do that. And usually I know it's done. If I come in the morning first thing and I put on that mix, what I typically do is I physically turn off the computer screen so I can't see the DAW.
This is
Yeah,
one of my favorite mixing tips.
and I just sit. I don't grab my pen and my pad or my phone, and I almost got to sit on my hands. Don't touch anything and listen. And if I find myself kind of grooving to the music a little bit, and I'm not thinking, wow, that guitar sounds a little too loud to me or something like that, then I know it's either done or I'm really, really close. I try to just, and again, you know, the thing with mixing is it's so subjective, you know, that is it ever really done? What does that really mean? You know, I've sent a mix that I thought was the best mix I ever done to a client, and they have a list of 5 tweaks that need to be done because to them, it wasn't done. So one thing that I try not to do is you don't want to overdo it. You have to know, it's a great question. You have to know when to stop, because you can listen to the mix forever and go, so I think I turn off the computer screen, I listen. And if I find myself kind of bopping to the music throughout the whole song, I know it's done. I mean, it's done unless the client says, nope, that background vocal needs to come up more, then it's not done. But outside of that,
and you're always going to find something.
Always. You could take 3 commercial mixes of your favorite songs from your favorite mix engineers. It could be 3 different decades if you want to, and listen to those 3 mixes, and we can all sit in a room and listen to those. Now these could be Grammy award-winning records, and we could sit in a room together, and there'll be something about that mix you may want to hear a little different, something which would be totally different from me. No one would probably listen to the mix and say it's perfect just the way it is. Most people would say it's perfect, but oh man, if that lead vocal was just a little bit louder in the chord, you know, there's always that. And so, and that is the challenge. When are you really done? But that's how I do it. If I don't look at the screen and I just listen.
Yeah, but you know, listening to your final mix with the monitor screen off, that's a good habit.
Yeah.
You know, all the time. Because you're going to force yourself to listen to all the details.
Right. Don't look at the plugins. No. Just listen. Just listen.
Exactly. Then I have, that's another very good question. Rich is asking, do you both mix at low levels? And do you use a dB meter to keep in check? I mix at low levels.
Me too.
Always. I don't need a dB meter at all. I can actually hear my wife scratching on the door and knocking smoothly, you know, when I mix. If she needs to talk to me, it's not going to be too loud, so I cannot hear if someone wants to enter the studio. So yeah, I don't mix at a very loud level.
No, I mix at a quiet enough level that if we were sitting next to each other mixing, that we can have a conversation with the music playing.
Exactly.
We wouldn't have to.
Do you mix a CLA style, and once you start your mix, you don't stop until the mix is completed? No, yeah. I mix, I'm going to go over the song, I'm going to take breaks, I'm going to get, back to the mix. It's going to depend on my schedule, first of all. It depends on if I have a full album to mix within a week, I'm not going to, of course, I'm going to be a bit more intense and probably going to go through the song right away on the same day. But I'm always going to take that 24-hour or 12-hour break before finalizing the mix. But it will depend on the schedule I have.
Yeah. I try to at least be done with the first pass, meaning, like you said, before the break. I try to get through the whole song in a sitting, and in that sitting, like you said, there's going to be some breaks in there because it takes me about 3 to 4 hours to mix a track, and I'll take some ear recalibration breaks. But I try to start a song and finish a song. It depends on a lot of variables. The thing about CLA, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, I think I made the example in Andrew Shep, you got to also remember, by the time the mix gets to CLA's SSL console, he's had 2 assistants working on that mix, doing all the editing, all the garbage is out of the way, everything's ready to go. Again, he's working with music where the tracks are recorded exceptionally. And when he puts it on the console and pushes up the faders for the first time, that sound is 80% of the mix. And he'll tell you that. I've heard him say that. It's true. So what Chris and I and what a lot of the people here and what I'm working on is that you know, I don't have an assistant that preps the mix, gets the tracks right, organizes the session, edits the vocals, tunes the vocals, does all that stuff, and then sends it to me. And then I go until I stop, like Chris does. We have to do all that work. So, you know, but, you know, so there has to be some breaks in there. And sometimes it may not always get done in one sitting because there's a lot of prep work that has to be done when you first start.
Yeah.
Where, you know, so he can mix a song in 2 to 3 hours. Remember, he also has an SSL with 48 channels. He gets a 200 track mix sent to him in Pro Tools. He has an assistant bouncing down, comping everything, getting everything together. So when it hits his console, it's a limited amount of tracks and all the prep work is done.
You're right. That's where you, that's
so
how it works.
It's a little different. So I wish I had that on every mix, but I don't.
But it does help to have an assistant to load your stuff. I actually had the luxury of having one when I was a year and a half ago. My friend Jesper helped me out a lot. I was getting a lot of mixes to do, and with the YouTube channel, and you know, there was a lot going on. So he was preparing my mixes. You know, he had my templates, and I
that's great.
Just sent him the tracks, and then the only thing I had to do was to mix the song. You know, without having to import all the tracks and
sit through
load my template and stuff. It takes a long time to do that stuff. You know,
get color code and all that, and so
everything is done.
So if that's all done for you, you could do it in one sitting. You could 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and you're done. Or you're done to where you could take your 24-hour break and then do your final tweaks.
Exactly.
So that's why he mixes the way he does.
Any advice for sharpening your mixing skills or tips? Is it okay to experimenting usually by throwing different techniques, plugins, and making a cool sound?
Yeah. The more experimentation you do, the better. There is no right or wrong to any of this stuff. It's all just guidelines. And I tell, you know, sharpening your mixing skills, the only way you get better at it is by doing. I equate to mixing just like being a musician, a guitar player. You don't pick up the guitar on day one and play like Eddie Van Halen, right? You pick up the guitar and how many hours are you willing to do it before you get good at it? And then I tell people, and I just did a podcast of my own, which Chris is going to be on hopefully soon. One of the podcast episodes, it was called Investing in Your Craft, Investing in Yourself. Get training. You know, be willing, if you can, spend a couple of bucks on training, whether it's Chris's courses or whoever your favorite instructor is. I tell people, I tell my audience, I've told my audience about Chris, and Chris, I'm sure, has told his audience about me. I say, look, I'm one teacher. I have one set of way of doing things. Chris is a great engineer as well. Go check out one of his courses, because even though we may use different DAWs, Chris, I think you said that you're not really teaching how to mix only in Cubase. You're teaching how to mix. You just happen to use Cubase, and I just happen to use Studio One, but the information will transfer from one DAW to the other. So Chris may have a certain way he works on drums that is completely different than the way I work on drums. But if you learn from two different teachers, you can pull what you want from those things and put it into your own workflow. And so my advice for sharpening your mixing skills is two things. Get training for multiple areas if you can, multiple avenues, and do a lot of mixing. And just do it. Just like if you were going to be a musician and play in a band. You got to sit down and do it.
Exactly. I totally agree. Don't be afraid to fail. Also.
No, you will fail.
Yeah, failing is going to get you better.
Most of your mixes are going to be terrible at first. And what I do, I'm sure you've done this, Chris, I have mixes from years ago. You know, if I go back and listen to a mix I did 2 years ago, and I've been doing this a long time, I go, wow, what the hell was I thinking? But that back then, that was my best. But you keep doing it and you get better. Yeah. And it's a journey, you know?
Yeah, the more you do it, the better you'll get, you know? Release your songs, that's another thing, you know? Mix them, they're not perfect, release them. Learn from what you did, fix that after. Release
the next one will be better. So. The next one will be better. And as long as you're getting better, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Now, there was a bit of a discussion about subscription-based plugins. I wish they weren't subscription-based. I talking about Slate plugins. I think. But I think you can buy them.
You can
individually if you want to.
You always could. It was always that. It was that way before it was subscription. Most companies are going subscription, or they're having a subscription option.
Yeah.
Where I think the subscription option is help a lot of people, and I understand it has a real negative thing with a lot of people. I don't look at it that way. I look at the subscription thing as pretty good, and here's why. Because number one, the individual plugins will typically cost you a lot more money per plugin. let's just use Slate for an example, but Plugin Alliance does this as well, and so does most of them. You know, for $150 a year, I think is what it is today. Don't quote me.
Mm-hmm.
You can have every Slate plugin that he has available. Okay, all the updates and any new ones he releases are included for free. Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to buy anything.
Nope.
A year from now, I think like you did, Chris, you said, you know what? I want to try something different. I don't want to use Slate now. I want to try this company. You just stop paying the subscription. You don't have to worry about, oh my God, I just bought all of his plugins and they were $200 a plugin and I spent $1,500 on all these plugins and now I'm not going to use them anymore. So some of the subscription I think is good if you want to experiment. If you want to try something out for a month and you don't like it, you could try something else. Overall, in the long run, it's going to be a little bit more cost beneficial. And so I don't look at the subscriptions as a negative, as long as you have the option. You know, if you want to buy it, you buy it. If you don't want to buy it, you can do the subscription. And the same thing with DAWs. I mean, everyone got all over Pro Tools with the subscription. PreSonus now just released, they're having a subscription option. I don't know if Steinberg does yet. No. But I think they're all going to go that way. And I like it because for someone like me, who has every DAW, but I don't use them all the time, but I work with lots of clients. So someone sends me a Pro Tools session, I have to have Pro Tools, but I only have to use Pro Tools. I could pay for it for a month and then not have to use it for 6 months. So if a project comes up, I pay for the subscription, use it for the project, stop paying it until I need to use it again. There's some benefit to that.
There's some pros and cons for sure. I don't have any subscription. Mm-hmm. But I used to have a Slate subscription, but at some point I kind of like to own the plugins. But you're right though; it can be very, very useful for a very low amount of money to get access to a bunch of very cool plugins. So the only thing like myself mixing client projects, that happened with my Slate plugins, where I actually stopped the subscription plan, and a few months after, the client comes back to, okay, can I have a instrumental version of my mix?
Oh, and it's all Slate plugins. Crap, okay. Yeah. Well, there you go.
I was like, okay, I need to get back and pay the subscription, and anyway, so it's all that, and a lot of them are gonna have only yearly subscription plans. So it's like, I don't want to pay a full year. It's like, so that's why I kind of stopped doing that. Except for, the only plugin that I don't mind personally paying a monthly fee or a weekly fee like they have is the one that I reviewed last week, which is the Listen To plugin, which is you stream your mix from that plugin from Cubase, and you just send a link to your client or your collaborator. That is different because it's not only a plugin, you're actually paying for the server that they're using to stream your music, there's a kind of a reason why you have to pay for that. It's kind of a service more than the plugin itself, that I don't mind. But it does work very well for a lot of people, a subscription-based plugin for sure.
I think as long as the manufacturer gives you an option, then it's great for everybody. You can choose whatever you want.
All right, so we're going to wrap things up soon. I'm just going to answer a few other questions that we have here. Let me check here. All right, hi Chris, this is especially for you. I love to mix in Cubase. I have Nuendo as well. Is there an advantage of finishing your mix in Nuendo? I noticed that there is more headroom on the master in Nuendo. I don't think there is. I have both. It's there's different features for sure between Cubase and Nuendo, and actually planning on making a video on that. What you're probably referring to, there might be I'm gonna have to check into this though, but you might have a reading option that is a bit different in Cubase and Nuendo, because you can do that also in Cubase. Let me show you briefly. I'm just gonna share my screen for a minute. I have Cubase open. There you go. Let me know, Dave, if you can see that.
But, I can. I can. I can see your screen. Your Cubase session.
Can you see the menu going on?
Yep, certainly.
All right. Okay, let me check here. Okay, can you see the project setup window here?
Yep.
All right. So you can actually, in Cubase also, change the amount of range that you have on the fader. Maybe this is what you're referring to, okay? So by default, plus 6 dB is going to be with Cubase. And you have also, I always set it up to plus 12 dB, which is going to give me a bit more range. I'm just going to enlarge this. You're going to see more range. I have like, it's visually, it's going to give me more range, okay? But it's still going to be the same amount of dB anyways. It's going to have a visually 12 dB, you know, from the unity point on my fader. Maybe that's what you're referring to, but I'm pretty sure they're pretty much the same. So I hope that answers your question. But if you have more info on that, let me know. Are there any great comprehensive mixing tutorials using only Cubase stock plugins? I'm actually working on a full mixing course using only Cubase stock plugins. My last song that I released a couple months ago was mixed only with Cubase stock plugins. So make sure you're on my mailing list. Okay, check the link in the description below to get on the mailing list, so you'll get updated on when that course is going to be available. Chaz is adding, I always do prepping, editing, comping, tuning, etc. in a separate session for each song, and then do mixes in a different dedicated session, preferably the next day. So yeah, same here. My mix session is only going to be mixing. You know, I'm not going to mix into a production or editing session. I do the same thing. I don't know about you, Dave. What's your workflow? But
yeah, I mean, most of by the time I'm mixing, all the comping and everything is typically all been done. So it depends. If it's my production, yes, it'll be in 2 separate sessions. If it's a client's production, it depends on what gets sent to me.
Cool. So there you go. So I think we're going to wrap this up. We've been on for more than 2 hours already.
Yeah, great.
It's almost like a Joe Rogan podcast. So hey, thank you guys for being here on this week's live Mixdown live session. Thank you, David, for being my guest on this one.
Oh, thank you.
I already have the link to your website in the description down below. Check out the Home Recording Made Easy YouTube channel. You also have a podcast.
I do.
Okay?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that briefly.
The homerecordingmadeeasy.com, and then it's a link podcast on that page, and you can listen to it on iTunes, Spotify, whatever your favorite podcast is. Mine's an audio podcast. It's not as high tech as yours here with video. But yeah, so sometimes I have guests like you do, and hopefully you're going to come on in the next few weeks and we'll work together there.
That's going to be fun.
And I talk about everything from home recording to actually running a studio business and how people can actually make money with their home studio. So yeah, so the podcast is a lot of fun.
So check out the podcast, go on his website. He has like a bunch of mixing courses, recording courses and everything. So check this, his website. The link is down below. So guys, I'm going to say, see you next time. I'm going to have a new video coming up this Friday. Next week, I'm going to skip the live session. I'm going to take a few days off. I'm going to be in and out of the studio. So I'm going to take it easy next week and be back with a live show in 2 weeks from now. All right. So you guys take care, and I'm going to see you next time. Don't forget to just like on your way out. And all right. Have a nice time with your family. Enjoy the summer. Enjoy the nice weather. I'm going to see you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody.